Bukem and Good Looking Records probably epitomises the whole drum and bass scene for me throughout the 90s, and Metalhead's probably being the other. But Bukem is a supreme producer as well as a DJ, which not many people from that time can boast. And I'm going to go straight into my top 10 because I want to cover from his Demons theme days back in 1990, I believe it first came out, which was around that time when acid house was big, and it was taking all those Armand breaks and muffled beats production all the way up to his Journey Inwards album, which came out in 2000, which would be his only studio album, which was a much more crisp, clean and soulful production, as well as all his 12 inches that he released in between. I'm not putting these tracks in chronological order or my favourite order. I just want to portray Bukem's top years. Let's not waste any more time, let's get into it. But be warned, because a lot of these platforms, these music platforms, don't have the full-length versions. It's so annoying. It's not a taster's menu. So let's start at 1990 or 91, when Demon's Theme came out, and it would be LTJ Bukem's first big release. I say big, it was big on the underground, it wasn't commercially big. It was when acid house and breakbeat were coming together. Ninja tunes, I mean, I just can't believe this was made in 1990. I mean, only the mixdown equipment gives it away, and it was, to me, drum and bass's answer to Moby's track Go, or 808 State's Pacific State track, and it was like, you have to remember the year here, at a time when most would disregard this music as just noise, or just only people on drugs like it, when they should all ask themselves, where does creativity come from? It doesn't come from academics, right? So then I go into Journey Inwards, which is the album title track from his album that came out in 2000, Journey Inwards. And it shows his progression, see what I did there, from 1990 to 2000. And, when you really, on Good Looking Records, the Earth series that came out, Progression Sessions, Logical Progression, Points in Time, the Cooking label, all this stuff, it just evolved so nicely in the 90s. It was all perfect timing when it came out. And this is just the other end of the 90s at 2000. It's just, it's to me the perfect track to blend breakbeat, soul and jazz together, and it never dates, it always remains cool. It's just trying to show you the flip side of where he came from Demon's Theme right until the year 2000. Back to 93 when he released Music, which was a huge hit, possibly one of his biggest hits, and it was just different to anything else that came out around that time. You have to remember in 93 that, those rave scenes, those euphoric rises in the middle of the track, letting the dance floor breathe. And you have to remember this was a time when drum and bass was only made for dance floors. It wasn't really made for home listening. And this tune kind of changed all that. Our World, another track from that only album that he did, Journey Inwards. I love this track, it's just, I don't normally like kids talking in tracks, but this one just works. The beat is tip top, but again, be warned, the full length track, I can't find it anywhere, unless you own it, which I do, but I don't want to go digging in my CDs and vinyl to get it out. Close to the Source is a classic drum and bass track. And it's what I call a hypnotic roller, and the flutes here just work so well. Moodswings, if you want a timeless classic, and this is the one. I mean, if you want an alternative to D&B, this is it, for down tempo, and it's just, a saxophone, a beat, and the Fender Rhodes. Beautiful combination. The amount of times I must have heard people that like this track. I don't know how you could dislike this track, really. Coolin out. Enough said. Jungle music, refined, 96. Atlantis, I Need You, a classic dance floor hit. In 92 this came out, way before Square Pusher days, and when you listen to that sample, you think, that's not going to work if you're producing a track, but it just does, and you just got to roll with it sometimes. Another number that's just king of the arm and break. Now, going back to his album in 2000, this track, Viewpoint, is really interesting because there's a track before it called Point of View, which kind of links to this track beautifully. It's kind of orchestral, it's got the strings, and they come back in on the track Viewpoint, and the beat is so different, and I'll just let you listen to it, but it's just bringing that 70s funk and soul back to the 90s, this whole album. I mean, it's hard to pick a tune from this album. long building tracks to zone out to, drive to, run to, walk to, whatever your escapism pleasure is. Finally, we close with Maya Angelou's vocals, which is what the sample is, from a Bill Clinton speech. Brilliantly chosen. And if you've never heard this track from the 90s, being a raver, then you're probably sleeping. All parties are hard, it's a blur, but Horizons came out in the mid-90s, was on that classic Chill Out album, I remember. And yeah, classic. So Horizons closes my top 10, and just to give a little summary of the times back then, as we entered the 90s, acid house, dance music from Detroit, breakbeat and hip hop were all exploding into the raves and the clubs of America and the UK. And as Laurent Garnier said, you know, when going back to France, you just had to get back to the UK, where all people were coming together for cool music. And this is when the overture of hardcore and then jungle and then turned into drum and bass was born. You know, and carrying that torch for me was Fabio, Groove Rider, Goldie, Hype, Andy C and Bukem. And it was Bukem's tracks such as Atlantis, Music, and Demon's Theme that cemented his status as a pioneer of this movement. And breakbeat, acid house and hip hop all mixed up into one turbocharged movement. And I just love the way that Bukem, you know, always refused to let music be boxed or categorized. And his only solo album he released in 2000 is timeless for this reason. You know, it's the perfect album, grabbing the baton in the 90s from those 70s jazz pioneers. And his production also progressed throughout the 90s, like from a home computer sessions all the way, you know, made for cosmic rave days, growing to a more prominent, funky, soulful side. And for me, hip hop and drum and bass ran alongside each other throughout the 90s. But it was around 97 that drum and bass took over for me, and the beat stepped up, and the scene only grew bigger and better, whilst hip hop went off into a flossy direction that I wasn't keen on. And although I went to the End nightclub many times, you know, to see Bukem play, I'm gutted I never saw an experience or a speed night with Bukem and Fabio. But as we moved into the mid to late 90s, though it was all about good-looking records, really. All the artists, the roster that was on his label, beautiful times. You know, you had PFM, Blame, Seba, Photek, Blue Martin, Intense, Makoto, Big Bud, Nookie, MC Conrad, PhD, Future Engineers, New Moon, Artemis. You know, and you just can't keep that bunch of creativity, those creative people together and keep them down for so long without it eventually coming to an end. But, you know, this is, you know, and the artwork had a rule, you know, no guns, no drugs, I seem to remember. And the music and the packaging and the artwork that's never been matched, in my opinion. You know, the creative arts coming together. This is my photo of all my good-looking collection, good-looking records. Bit of a fan, I know. And I remember thinking towards the late 90s, especially listening to the Earth series, that these producers and these beats are now superseding what beats the American rappers were putting out. And I just thought, how good would it be to have those American rappers over these beats and this production? Never happened though. But yeah, Big Bud, Infinity and Late Night Blues, those two albums was to me when Good Looking Records peaked. And you know, going on road trips, going to Ibiza, Brazilian beats were popular at that time, very fashionable, and Good Looking Records couldn't put a foot wrong. And I remember reading a few things at that time, notably Blame and Bukem's Fallout, and you know, Big Bud had a fear of flying, which he eventually got over. And there were lots of creativity and ideas that were going against Good Looking Records methods. And I think, like Bukem said, you know, before Big Bud came to Good Looking Records, he wasn't turning over 30,000 units. But because he had a fear of flying, he couldn't go and do live gigs, which is where they made their money. And you know, losing Big Bud and Blame seemed to be on the surface, showing a lot more of the anxieties that were bubbling up underneath. But it seems to be written in folklore what happened with Good Looking Records and the mass exodus of artists that all kind of left in the early noughties around the same time. And this is when Good Looking Records stepped back from the limelight and went back to focusing on releasing EPs ever since, which is back to where it all started.